The beautiful black nun stood in chains on the makeshift auction block, her torn habit fluttering in the desert wind. Sister Magdalene Grace Washington kept her chin raised as the crowd of outlaws jeered below. The auctioneer's voice carried across the trading post like a vulture's cry. "Prime cargo, gentlemen. Educated, clean. What am I bid?" Magdalene closed her eyes. The 23rd Psalm rose from her lips, each word a shield against the ugliness surrounding her. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." Her voice grew, stronger with each verse, cutting through the crude laughter. Ezekiel Cordovan pressed his back against the saloon's outer wall. The whiskey in his gut had turned to acid. He'd seen plenty of evil in his 32 years, witnessed things that killed his faith stone dead. But something about the woman's dignity in the face of degradation made his chest tighten. Her voice never wavered, even as rough hands shoved her forward for inspection. Even as the bidding grew heated, she recited scripture with the calm of someone who believed God was listening. Zeke spat in the dust. If God was listening, he had a cruel sense of humor. The auctioneer raised his gavel. "Sold to the gentleman." From Tucson, a fat man in a stained vest stepped forward, coins jingling in his palm. His smile made Zeke's trigger finger itch. The man whispered something to his companion that made them both laugh. The sound was like breaking glass. Magdalene opened her eyes. For a moment, they met Zeke's across the crowd. Brown eyes that held no hatred, no despair. Just a quiet acceptance that made his soul ache. He thought of his mother, how she'd looked. The day they took her south, the same dignity, the same faith that hadn't saved her. Zeke pushed off the wall. The saloon behind him was full of Kellerman's men, drunk, distracted, the perfect kindling for chaos. He slipped inside through the back door, moving like smoke between the tables. A bottle here, a shove there. An insult dropped in the right ear. The first punch flew before he reached the front door. The brawl erupted like wildfire. Tables crashed. Men shouted and swung at shadows in the dust and confusion. Zeke drew his Colt and put 3 shots into the auction platform supports. The structure collapsed in a shower of splinters. He reached Magdalene as she struggled to her feet, chains tangled around her ankles. Their eyes met again. Hers widened with understanding and something that might have been hope. "Can you ride?" he asked, producing a knife. She nodded. The chains fell away. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the horses. Behind them, the chaos was spreading. Someone screamed about the prisoner. Guns began to bark. Zeke boosted Magdalene onto his spare horse. She settled into the saddle with practiced ease, gathering the reins despite her bound wrists. A surprise that filed itself away for later consideration. They rode hard into the desert. The sun hammered down on red rock and thorny scrub. Behind them, pursuit was organizing. Voices carried on the wind. The drum of hoofbeats growing closer. A canyon opened ahead. Narrow walls that would funnel them toward a dead end or salvation. Zeke chose salvation and spurred his horse into the gap. The walls closed around them. Cool shadow after blazing heat. Their horses' breathing echoed off stone worn smooth by flash floods. The sound of pursuit faded, but it would return. A mile into the canyon, Zeke spotted what he'd hoped for. A crack in the western wall, barely wide enough for a horse. He dismounted and led the way through. Magdalene followed without question, trusting a stranger who'd killed to save her. The crack opened into a hidden valley. Grass in a spring, an old Apache camp long abandoned. They could rest here, let the horses drink, figure out what came. Next, Zeke cut the ropes binding Magdalene's wrists. She rubbed circulation back into her hands, watching him with those steady brown eyes. "Why?" she asked. The question he'd been dreading. Because seeing her reminded him of his mother. Because her faith shamed his faithlessness. Because sometimes a man had to do something decent or lose what was left of his soul. Don't like bullies, he said instead. She studied his face, looking for truth beneath the lie. You risked your life for a stranger. Maybe I'm just stupid. I don't think so. The silence stretched between them, awkward as a broken bone. She was beautiful, he realized, even with dust in her hair and tear tracks on her cheeks. Beautiful in a way that made him remember he was still a man under all the scar tissue. I'm Sister Magdalene Grace Washington, she said, of the Sisters of Mercy in Philadelphia. Ezekiel Cordovan, late of nowhere special. Thank you, Ezekiel. His name in her mouth sounded different, cleaner somehow. He turned away to tend the horses before he said something foolish. They'll track us, he warned. Kellerman doesn't like losing merchandise. Then, we'd better pray for deliverance. Zeke's laugh held no humor. You pray, I'll keep watch. But as the sun dropped toward the canyon rim, painting the sky the color of fresh blood, he found himself listening to her quiet words. Not praying himself. He was long past that comfort, but listening all the same. They rode north at first light. The desert stretched endless in every direction, broken only by red mesas that jutted from the earth like ancient tombstones. Zeke led them through arroyos and along ridgelines where the hard ground wouldn't hold tracks. Magdalene sat her horse with the grace of someone raised to riding, another small mystery. Nuns in Philadelphia didn't typically learn horsemanship. Where did you learn to ride? He asked during a rest stop. My father bred horses, before the calling. She offered nothing more. Her past was a door she kept firmly closed. The sun climbed higher. Heat shimmered off the rocks and waves. Zeke's shirt stuck to his back with sweat and something that might have been fever. The bullet graze on his shoulder was starting to burn. You're hurt, Magdalene observed. I've had worse. She dismounted and approached him with hands already moving toward his shoulder. He stepped back. I said I'm fine. And I'm saying you're not. Her fingers found the torn fabric. Gentle pressure that made him wince. The wound had opened during their escape. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage. Sit, she commanded. Something in her voice brooked no argument. Zeke found himself settling against a boulder while she tore strips from her already damaged habit. Her hands were steady as she cleaned the wound with water from their precious supply. You've done this before, he said. The sisters run a hospital. We tend whoever comes to our door. Her touch was soft but sure, professional. It had been so long since anyone had cared for him, with such tenderness that he almost forgot to breathe. There, she said, securing the fresh bandage. It should heal clean if you don't push it. Their faces were close, too close. He could see gold flecks in her brown eyes. Smell the sage in her hair from sleeping under stars. Something shifted in the air between them. He stood abruptly. Put distance between them before he did something they'd both regret. They mounted again and rode in silence. The tension that had nothing to do with pursuit followed them across the broken landscape. By evening, they'd covered 20 miles. Not enough. Kellerman's men would be tracking them with Apache scouts, the kind of men who could follow a ghost across solid rock. They made camp in a box canyon with good sight lines and water. No fire. Cold beans and hardtack while the last light died in the west. Tell me about this school, Zeke said, settling against his saddle. Magdalene's face softened. St. Catherine's Mission. For Apache children who've lost their families. Teaching them to read and write. To find their place in both worlds. Noble work, necessary work. The way she said it carried weight. Personal investment beyond religious duty. You speak their language? Some, enough to show respect. Zeke studied her profile in the gathering darkness. This woman was full of surprises. Most white folks couldn't be bothered learning Apache words beyond what they needed to trade or threaten. What made you choose them? Her hands stilled on the water bottle she'd been capping. They're not the savages people claim. I've seen their children, the loss in their eyes. Someone should care. The silence stretched between them. Stars emerged. Overhead, cold and distant as judgment. You don't approve, she said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Zeke shifted against his saddle. The woman saw too much, read him too easily. The Apache have their own ways, their own beliefs. What makes you think they need yours? I'm not trying to replace their faith. Just give them tools to survive in the world that's coming. Her voice carried no defensiveness, just quiet certainty that made him want to believe her. The world's already come, he said. Brought nothing but blood and broken promises. Then maybe it's time for something different. She lay down on her bedroll, using her folded habit as a pillow. Within minutes her breathing had deepened into sleep. The sleep of someone with a clear conscience. Zeke took first watch. The desert night was full of sounds, wind through stone. The distant cry of a coyote. His own heartbeat counting the hours until dawn. He found himself watching her sleep. The way moonlight caught in her hair. The peaceful expression that spoke of unshakable faith. When was the last time he'd slept so easily? Before the war. Before the massacre. Before he learned that God either didn't exist or didn't care. A sound made him turn. Hoofbeats in the distance. Multiple horses moving fast. He touched Magdalene's shoulder. She woke instantly, alert and ready. Company, he whispered. They led their horses deeper into the canyon. Found a cluster of boulders that would provide cover. The hoofbeats grew closer, echoing off stone walls. Riders passed their hiding place without stopping. Kellerman's men, pushing hard through the night. Following the wrong trail, thanks to Zeke's misdirection earlier. But they'd be back when the trail went cold. We need to move at first light, he said. Magdalene nodded. No complaints about the shortened rest. No questions about their chances. They settled back into watchful waiting. The silence between them had changed. Become something charged with unspoken recognition. They were bound together. Now by shared danger. By the trust required to stay alive. Why did you really save me? She asked in the darkness. The question he'd been avoiding, the truth he wasn't ready to speak. Does it matter? Everything matters. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning he wasn't ready to examine. Dawn found them already moving. The sun rose blood-red over jagged peaks, painting the desert the color of old violence. They had water for 2 days. Food for 3 if they rationed carefully. And somewhere behind them, patient as death itself, Kellerman's hunters were closing the distance. The horse beneath Zeke shifted restlessly. Animals could sense things humans missed. Danger riding the wind. The way of watching eyes. There, Magdalene said softly. She pointed to a ridge half a mile behind them. Sunlight glinted off metal. A spyglass or rifle scope. They'd been found. Zeke kicked his horse into a gallop. Magdalene matched his pace without question. Behind them, war cries split the morning air. Apache scouts earning their blood money. The chase had begun. They rode until their horses stumbled with exhaustion. The sun beat down merciless and white, turning the air into shimmering glass. Zeke's shoulder throbbed with each stride, blood seeping through Magdalene's careful bandaging. By midday he was swaying in the saddle. We need to stop, Magdalene said. Can't stop, they're gaining. You're burning with fever. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd tended the dying. He wanted to argue, but the desert tilted sideways when he turned his head. She guided them into a slot canyon where red walls rose like cathedral spires. Ancient petroglyphs watched from the stone. Spirits of the long dead bearing witness to their struggle. Zeke slid from his saddle and collapsed. The ground rushed up to meet him, solid and unforgiving as judgment. Magdalene caught his shoulders before he could hit stone. Her hands were cool against his burning skin. "The wound's gone bad," she whispered. She helped him into shade then, set about making him as comfortable as the harsh country allowed. Water trickled between his lips. A damp cloth pressed to his forehead. The fever took hold as the sun reached its peak. Zeke's mind drifted between past and present. Memory and nightmare blurred together in the heat. He was back at Bear Canyon, watching his commanding officer give orders that would stain his soul forever. "Children in the camp, Colonel," he heard his younger self protest. "Women, too." Colonel Kellerman's laugh was cold as winter steel. "Apache. Our Apache, Lieutenant. Orders are to clean them out." "Sir, with respect, these aren't hostiles. They're gathering pinyon nuts, families preparing for winter. You questioning my orders, Cordovan?" The dream shifted. Gunfire echoed off canyon walls. Women screamed, children ran. Zeke tried to stop it, tried to shield the innocent, but there were too many soldiers and too much blood. He woke to gentle hands checking his temperature. Magdalene's face swam into focus above him. Worried lines creased her brow. "How long?" he asked. "2 days." His mouth felt stuffed with cotton. She helped him drink, supporting his head while water trickled down his throat. "You talked in your sleep," she said quietly. The words hit him harder than any bullet. His secrets were no longer his own. "What did I say?" "Enough." She didn't push for more. Didn't demand explanations or judgment. Just continued tending him, with the same steady care she'd shown from the beginning. "The children," he said, "at Bear Canyon. I couldn't save them, I know. Kellerman ordered it. Solid Apache were Apache, didn't matter if they were hostile or peaceful. I know." Her voice held no condemnation, no horror at what he'd witnessed. Just quiet acceptance of the truth he'd carried alone for so long. "I tried to report it. Military justice. They said I was a liar and a coward, drummed me out in disgrace." Magdalene wrung out the cloth, her movements deliberate and sure. "You tried to do what was right. Trying isn't enough. Those children are still dead, and you're still alive." That has to mean something, he wanted to argue. To explain that. Surviving when innocence died was its own kind of damnation. But the fever had burned away his strength, along with his defenses. God let it happen," he said instead. "My God grieves for what was lost." Pretty words. They don't bring back the dead. She set the cloth aside and met his eyes. "No, they don't. But maybe they can still save the living." Her hand found his. Warm and steady. "Is that why you saved me?" "Because you couldn't save them." The question hung between them, sharp as broken glass, truth demanding to be spoken. "Maybe," he admitted. Then their memory did something good. He stared at her in the fading light. This woman who'd lost everything and still found reasons to believe. Who could look at his failure and see redemption instead of condemnation? "How do you do it?" he asked. "Keep faith when everything falls apart?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of her own struggles. "Faith isn't believing everything works out for the best. It's believing we can still choose good, even when everything goes wrong." Night fell around them like a dark blessing. She built a small fire, hidden deep in the canyon where the light wouldn't betray them. They shared beans and hardtack in comfortable silence. "I lost my whole family to cholera," she said suddenly. "Parents, 3 brothers, baby sister, all in 1 week." Her voice was steady, but he heard the old pain underneath. "I was so angry. Cursed God for taking them and leaving me alone. Spent months asking why. What changed? I stopped asking why and started asking what now." She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "The children at St. Catherine's lost their families too. Their whole way of life, but they're still here. Still trying to find their place in the world. Someone should help them. And if God doesn't, then we do it without him." The honesty in her voice stunned him. This woman of faith admitting Doubt, acknowledging the possibility that they might be alone in an indifferent universe. Doesn't that terrify you? Every day. But terror isn't an excuse for giving up. They sat watching flames dance between them. The fire cast shifting shadows on canyon walls, making the ancient petroglyphs seem to move and breathe. I haven't prayed in 5 years, he said. I haven't stopped. Not sure it matters. Why keep trying? She looked at him across the fire. Her eyes held depths he was only beginning to fathom. Because the alternative is becoming what we fight against. He understood then. Faith wasn't about believing in divine intervention. It was about refusing to let evil have the final word. About choosing hope even when hope seemed foolish. Especially. Then, they took turns keeping watch through the night. When Zeke woke at dawn, his fever had broken. The infection was still there, but no longer threatening to consume him. Magdalene knelt by the stream, refilling their water bottles. Morning light caught in her hair, turning it to burnished copper. She moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for another day of running. We should reach the trading post by evening, he said. Will it be safe? Nowhere's safe. But we can resupply, maybe find help. She nodded without complaint. This woman who'd lived in comfortable certainty now faced each day with the possibility of death or worse. They rode out as the sun cleared the canyon rim. Behind them, dust clouds marked their pursuers' approach, still coming, still determined to finish what they'd started. But something had changed during the fever-dream nights. The space between them had shifted, become charged with recognition. They were no longer strangers bound by circumstance. They were two people who'd shown each other their wounds and chosen to keep walking together. The trading post appeared through heat shimmer, a cluster of adobe buildings squatting against red bluffs. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Horses stood, hitched to the rail, tails switching at flies. Too many horses. Zeke reined up behind a boulder outcropping. His gut twisted with recognition. Those weren't traders' mounts. They were cavalry horses, well-fed, well-groomed, the kind Kellerman's men favored. It's a trap, he said. Magdalene studied the buildings with the same careful attention she'd given his fever. How many? 6 horses, maybe more inside. They'd been herded here, driven like cattle toward this inevitable moment. Kellerman had read their intentions, predicted their desperation for supplies and safe haven. The old hunter had learned his prey too well. Movement in the window of the main building. A rifle barrel glinting in afternoon light. Waiting. We could go around, Magdalene said. Where? Desert's empty for 50 miles in any direction. They'll run us down in open country. Their water was nearly gone. The horses were stumbling with exhaustion. This was their last chance, and Kellerman knew it. There's another way, Zeke said. He pointed to the narrow canyon that cut behind the trading post. Ancient Apache route through the mountains. Dangerous in the best of times. Probably suicidal with wounded riders and dying horses. We won't make it, Magdalene said, reading his thoughts. We won't make it here either. They were still deciding when the choice was taken from them. Riders emerged from concealment, blocking their retreat. 6 men in dust-colored clothes, rifles held casual but ready. At their head rode a man Zeke recognized. Colonel Brass Kellerman, still wearing the bearing of military authority despite being 15 years out of uniform. Silver hair beneath a black hat, eyes cold as winter stone. Lieutenant Cordovan, Kellerman called. Been a long time. The title was mockery. They'd stripped him of rank along with everything else. Not long enough, Colonel. Kellerman's men spread out, forming a loose circle. Professional soldiers turned to darker work, but still lethal. Still disciplined. Caused me considerable trouble, Kellerman continued. Destroying my property, killing my men, should have killed more. Always were too mouthy for your own good. Kellerman's gaze shifted to Magdalene. His smile made Zeke's skin crawl. Sister, you've led us quite a chase. Magdalene met his stare without flinching. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. The certainty in Kellerman's voice carried the weight of terrible experience. This man had broken stronger people than a nun from Philadelphia. Dismount, Kellerman ordered. Slowly. They had no choice. Zeke climbed down from his saddle, every muscle screaming protest. Magdalene followed, her movements careful and controlled. Kellerman's men bound their hands with practiced efficiency. Rope bit into Zeke's wrists, tight enough to cut circulation. They were prodded toward the trading post at gunpoint. The interior was dim after harsh sunlight, tables overturned. Bullet holes in the walls. The real owners were nowhere to be seen, which told its own story. Kellerman settled into a chair, completely at ease. His men took positions around the room, covering every angle of escape. You cost me a lot of money, Cordovan. The sister was premium merchandise. Already had buyers. Lined up in Mexico. Sleep well at night? Zeke asked. Like a baby. Supply and demand, Lieutenant. Basic economics. Kellerman poured himself whiskey from a bottle on the table. His movements were unhurried, almost casual, a predator confident in his power. Course, money's not the real issue here. It's about respect. Can't have every saddle tramp thinking they can interfere with my business. He took a sip, savoring the burn. Gonna make an example of you both. Something folks will remember. Magdalene spoke for the first time since entering. What happened to you? Kellerman paused, glass halfway to his lips. Excuse me? You were a soldier once, sworn to protect people. What happened? I got practical. You got lost. Kellerman set down his glass with deliberate care. You think you know me, sister? I know what you've become. The room went dead quiet. Even Kellerman's men shifted uneasily. Something in Magdalene's voice cut through the casual brutality, exposing the rot beneath. War ended, Kellerman said finally. Had to find new employment. War never ended for you. It just found new targets. Kellerman stood abruptly. His chair scraped against wooden floors, the sound sharp as breaking bone. Enough philosophy. Time to get down to business. He nodded to his men. Two of them grabbed Magdalene's arms, dragging her toward the door. She didn't struggle, but her eyes never left Kellerman's face. Let me tell you what's going to happen, Kellerman said to Zeke. Your lady friend's going south to some very interested buyers. You're going to watch her leave. Then we're going to have a long conversation about respect. Rage flooded through Zeke's veins. The rope binding his wrists cut deeper as he strained against it. She's innocent. Nobody's innocent, Lieutenant. You taught me that. The words hit like physical blows. Kellerman was right. Zeke had taught him that lesson at Bear Canyon when he'd tried to expose the massacre. When he'd shown that even the righteous could be destroyed by speaking truth to power. You remember now, Kellerman said, reading his expression. How you came crying to headquarters about civilian casualties. How you thought justice mattered more than loyalty. Memory crashed. Over Zeke, the military tribunal. Kellerman's testimony painting him as a coward and liar. The way his fellow officers had turned their backs when the verdict came down. You destroyed my career, Kellerman continued. Cost me my pension, my reputation. Everything I'd built in. 20 years of service. You murdered children. I followed orders, something you never learned to do. Kellerman moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Funny how things work out. Here we are again. Only this time, I'm giving the orders. He turned toward his men holding Magdalene. Take her to the wagon. Careful with the merchandise. Wait, Zeke said. Something in his voice made everyone freeze. You want justice? Fine. Let her go. This is between us. Kellerman studied him with the interest of a scientist examining a specimen. Touching, but I don't think so. See, hurting her hurts. You, and hurting you is the whole point. The truth of it settled over the room like smoke. This wasn't about money or business. It was about revenge. About settling old scores written in blood and betrayal. Kellerman had spent 15 years planning this moment. Outside, more horses approached, reinforcements arriving right on schedule. The net was closing, tighter and more complete than Zeke had imagined. They were trapped in Kellerman's web, with no escape and no hope of rescue. The game was over before it had truly begun. Kellerman smiled, reading defeat in Zeke's eyes. Welcome to my world, Lieutenant, where the righteous get exactly what they deserve. They chained them in the root cellar beneath the trading post. Stone walls sweating moisture. Air thick with the smell of rotting potatoes and despair. A single candle threw dancing shadows across their prison. Magdalene sat against the far wall, her torn habit pulled tight around her shoulders. The chains around her ankles clinked softly when she moved. Her eyes held a distant look, as if she were seeing something beyond the stone and darkness. Zeke tested his bonds for the 100th time. The metal had worn grooves in his wrists, but the chains held firm. Kellerman's men knew their business. Above them, boots paced the floor. Voices discussed routes and timetables. The machinery of human trafficking grinding forward with mechanical precision. They're moving us tomorrow, Zeke said. Magdalene nodded without looking at him. She'd been silent for hours, lost in some internal struggle that seemed to consume her from within. You in there with us, sister? She turned toward him then. Her eyes were different, hollow in a way that made his chest tighten. Where is he? She asked. The question hung in the stale air between them, heavy with the weight of collapsing faith. Those children upstairs, did you see them? Zeke had seen. 3 young faces pressed against the wagon slats. Apache children, probably, or Mexican. It didn't matter to Kellerman's buyers. I saw. They're crying for their mothers. Mothers who are probably dead. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. Where is God in that? Zeke had no answer. He'd stopped asking that question years ago. Maybe he's not listening, he said. Or maybe he never was. The words came out flat, empty of the faith that had sustained her through everything else. Seeing those children had broken something in her that all the personal suffering couldn't touch. You don't mean that, don't I? She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small against the vast indifference of the universe. I've spent my whole life believing suffering had meaning, that God worked through human hands to bring good from evil. That if I just had enough faith, served with enough devotion, somehow it would all make sense. Her laugh was bitter as alkali. Water, those children don't care about my faith. It won't save them, won't ease their fear, won't bring back their families. Zeke watched her unravel with something approaching panic. Her faith had been the one constant in his world since the rescue. The bright thread that pulled him forward when everything else seemed hopeless. Your faith saved me, he said quietly. No, you saved yourself. I just happened to be there. That's not true, isn't it? What did my prayers accomplish? What? Did all my righteousness change? We're still here. Those children are still suffering. Evil still wins. She was right, and they both knew it. But hearing her say it felt like watching the last star burn out. So what now? He asked. Now nothing. We die. They die. The world keeps turning. The candle flickered, casting wild shadows on the walls. Above them, someone laughed. The sound echoed down through the floorboards, mocking their despair. Zeke studied her face in the dancing light. This woman who'd pulled him back from the edge of his own darkness. Who'd shown him that choosing good was possible, even when it seemed pointless. You remember what you told me about faith? He said. She didn't respond. You said it wasn't about believing everything works out. It was about choosing good even when everything goes wrong. Pretty words. They don't mean anything. They meant something to me that got her attention. She looked at him with eyes that held too much pain for one person to carry. I was wrong, she said. Faith is just another word for giving up, for accepting that things can't change. No, the word came out harder than he'd intended. Sharp enough to cut through her despair. Faith is what you did when you convinced me to turn back for those captives. When you made me see that running away wasn't the answer. We didn't turn back. We got caught. We haven't turned back yet. Something shifted in her expression. A flicker of the woman who'd faced down an auction block with quiet dignity. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe your God doesn't work the way you thought. Maybe. He doesn't prevent suffering. Maybe he just gives us the strength to fight it. Zeke tested his chains again, feeling for weakness in the links. The metal had been worn smooth by countless prisoners before them. Those children upstairs, they're not saved yet. We're not dead yet. Maybe that's enough. Magdalene was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a different quality. Still wounded, but no longer hollow. Even if we escape, we can't save everyone. We don't have to save everyone, just the ones in front of us. The odds are impossible. The odds were impossible at the auction block too. She almost smiled at that. The expression transformed. Her face, bringing back echoes of the woman who'd tended his fever with gentle hands. You're asking me to believe in miracles. I'm asking you to believe in choice. Your choice. My choice. The choice to keep fighting even when fighting seems pointless. Above them, the voices grew quieter. Night settling over the camp. Guards changing shifts. Routines that might provide opportunity for those desperate enough to take it. How? She asked. Zeke had been thinking about that. The chains were solid, but the ring holding them to the wall was old, corroded by years of moisture. It might give way with enough pressure. The ring's weak. If we both pull at the same time, and then we find out if your God helps those who help themselves. They positioned themselves on opposite sides of the ring. Magdalene's chains were shorter, forcing her to work at an awkward angle. The metal cut into their wrists as they strained against it. Nothing. They tried again, and again. Each attempt, leaving them more exhausted and bloodied. On the fourth try, something shifted, a grinding sound from deep in the stone. The ring moved a fraction of an inch. Again, Zeke whispered. They pulled with everything they had. With the desperation of drowning people reaching for air. With the fury of those who'd seen too much suffering to accept defeat quietly. The ring tore free. They sat in stunned silence, hardly believing their luck. Above them, the guards continued their patrol, unaware that their prisoners were no longer quite so helpless. Now what? Magdalene asked. Now we find out what we're really made of. Zeke wrapped the loose chain around his fist, turning it into a weapon. Magdalene gathered the torn pieces of her habit, binding them into makeshift rope. They weren't soldiers, weren't heroes. Just two broken people who'd found something worth fighting for in each other, and the innocents sleeping in the wagon above. You ready? He asked. Magdalene met his eyes. Her faith had been tested and found wanting. But in its place, something harder had taken root. The iron certainty that some things were worth dying for. Ready. They crept up the cellar stairs in the darkness before dawn. Zeke's chains wrapped around his fist, the metal warm from his grip. Magdalene followed, her makeshift rope coiled and ready. The guard at the top was young, barely old enough to shave. He dozed against the doorframe, rifle loose in his arms. Probably dreaming of home and safety. Zeke struck fast and silent. The chain caught the guard across the temple, dropping him without a sound. They dragged him into the shadows, binding him with Magdalene's rope. 1 down, 5 to go. The trading post was dark, except for embers glowing in the fireplace. 2 guards slept on bedrolls near the door. Another sat watch by the window, silhouetted against starlight. Zeke pointed toward the back of the building. Magdalene nodded and melted into the shadows. She moved with the grace of someone who'd learned to walk softly in hospital corridors during the long night hours. The guard by the window never saw her coming. Magdalene's makeshift sap caught him behind the ear. He slumped forward, unconscious but breathing. The sleeping guards were harder. Had to be taken simultaneously or risk one raising the alarm. Zeke caught Magdalene's eye and held up 3 fingers. 2-1, they struck together. The guards dropped into deeper sleep, secured with the rope that had held their weapons. That left Kellerman and 1 man in the back room where the children were kept. Zeke pressed his ear to the door. Quiet voices, Kellerman's laugh. The soft crying of frightened children. He tried the handle. Locked. Magdalene touched his shoulder and pointed to a window high on the wall. Too small for him, but she might fit. Zeke boosted her up, steadying her as she worked the latch. She disappeared inside without a sound. Moments later, the door opened from within. Magdalene stood in the doorway, blood on her knuckles and fire in her eyes. Behind her, Kellerman's last man lay unconscious. On the floor, the children huddled in a corner. 3 Apache young ones, barely old enough to understand what was happening to them. Their eyes were wide with terror and hope. Kellerman sat at a table, hands visible and empty. He'd aged in the hours since their capture. Gray stubble covered his cheeks. His uniform was wrinkled and stained. "Impressive," he said calmly. "Didn't think you had it in you, sister." Magdalene didn't respond. She knelt beside the children, speaking softly. In their language, words of comfort and safety. "It's over, Kellerman," Zeke said. "Is it? You planning to kill me, Lieutenant?" The question hung in the air between them. Heavy with the weight of justice and revenge. Kellerman had destroyed lives, sold children, murdered innocents. The world would be cleaner without him. Zeke raised the chain. 1 quick blow would end it. End the evil and the pain and the fear. "Do it," Kellerman said. "Prove you're no better than me." "He's not," Magdalene said quietly. She stood, placing herself between Zeke and his target. Her eyes met his across the small space. "This isn't who you are. He deserves to die, probably. But you don't deserve to become him." Zeke's hand trembled. The chain felt heavy as judgment. All those years of guilt and rage demanded satisfaction. Demanded blood payment for blood debt. "Justice," he said. "Whose justice, yours or God's?" "I thought you didn't believe in God anymore." Magdalene's smile was sad and wise and achingly beautiful. "I'm still deciding, but I believe in you." The chain dropped from his hand, clattered to the floor with the sound of abandoned vengeance. Kellerman laughed. "Soft, always were too soft. For this world. Maybe, but I'm still breathing, and your operation is finished." They bound Kellerman with his own rope, gagged him with strips torn from his shirt. The children clung to Magdalene as she led them toward the door. Outside, dawn painted the sky the color of fresh hope. The horses were ready. Supplies gathered. The long road to safety stretched ahead. "Where now?" Magdalene asked. "Salvation Creek. Federal marshal there will take custody of our friend. See that those young ones get back to their people." She nodded, helping the smallest child onto her horse. The little girl had stopped crying, started to believe in rescue. They rode away from the trading post as the sun climbed higher. Behind them, smoke rose from the building they'd set ablaze. Kellerman's slave operation burning to ash and memory. "What happens after?" Magdalene asked when they stopped to rest. "After what?" "After we reach Salvation Creek. After the children are safe. After Kellerman faces trial." Zeke studied her face in the morning light. She'd found her faith again, But it was different now. Tempered by experience, strengthened by choice. I don't know. Marshall offered me a job once, cleaning up corruption in the territories. Dangerous work, meaningful work. She was quiet. For a moment, watching the children play by the stream. Their laughter carried on the desert wind. I never took those final vows, she said. Never got the chance before all this started. You thinking of going back to Philadelphia? I'm thinking of going forward. These territories need schools. Need someone to teach children to read and write and find their place in the world. Also dangerous work. Also meaningful. They looked at each other across the distance that had defined them from the beginning. Nun and gunfighter. Faith and doubt. Mercy and justice. Partners? He asked. Partners. 3 months later, Zeke wore a federal marshal's badge as he rode into another corrupt town. Magdalene rode beside him, her schoolbooks packed in saddlebags alongside his ammunition. They'd found their faith in different places. His in the choice to protect the innocent. Hers in the work of healing broken places. Together, they carried light into dark corners of the world. Not because they expected to win every battle, but because some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. Behind them, the first school bell rang in Salvation Creek. Children's voices rose in song. Apache and Mexican and Anglo voices blending into something new and hopeful. The sound followed them into the desert. A promise that broken things could be made whole, that love could grow in the hardest ground. That faith was not belief in easy answers, but commitment to necessary work. They rode toward the setting sun and whatever waited beyond the horizon. Two people who'd found their calling. In each other and in service to something larger than themselves. The desert stretched endless ahead, beautiful and terrible and full of possibilities. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.